Buenos días desde México.
Good morning from Mexico. We say hi to all the Maris of Champagne that are connecting to this international broadcasting of the Maris Global Network of Schools meeting. In this third day of our meetings, we are in Mexico City to focus on our characteristics as global. The perspective of the Institute has been a constant, like Father Marcelin said, all the dioceses of the world have a place in our plans. Marcelin also wanted that our mission was announcing Jesus and the formation of good citizens and Christians. What does it mean to be a good citizen in today's world? Being a citizen in the 21st century is the following. The creation of good citizens, I remind you, is part of our mission as Marists, of global citizens. And we have invited Professor Fernando Reimers to give us a taste of his wisdom and experience to see how a new type of global education can help us to transform the world. Professor Fernando Reimers.
National Education y director de la Global Education Innovation Initiative de la Universidad de Harvard. La Global Education.
This is a collaboration of investigation among countries that focuses on 21st century education. Professor Reimers has been part of Harvard since 1998 and is an expert in global education. His teachings are focused on comprehension, how to educate young people and children so that they can have a lot of richness in this century. He helped to create the Imagining to Work Together, which is a new social contract for education. He also developed plans of studies with the UN that is used in many schools around the world. He currently is working in education and in the fact that policies on education and developments of the professors have and how it affects the development of young people and children. He has written or edited 45 books, of which Education to Build Back Better is one of them, Education During COVID-19, and University and School Collaboration During a Pandemic. Professor Reimers, thank you for accepting our invitation. For us, it is a great honor to have you here. Give a round of applause to Professor Reimers. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? I believe you cannot hear me. Can you all hear me at this moment? I believe not.
En este momento.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Oh, now you can. Well, thank you for the invitation and for the presentation. I'm grateful to be with you in this meeting.
Of the Maris schools of the world. Among other things, I studied in Venezuela, the country where I was born, where I grew up, in the Rosario School that was founded by a Maris brother who worked in the Cervantes School and later in Marist schools. He founded the Rosario School alongside with other people. They had different practices that learned from the Marists, so mainly combining work school for with professions like woodwork. At the same time as I was studying history, chemistry, and that was very useful to me. I think this effort, this legacy of the brother Champagnat that goes over more than 17 countries all around the world and has hundreds of schools all around the world, has a global charism, which is the idea that came from a French priest of teaching with love, because that's the best way of learning. And it is very important, of course, to promote education to every kid. And that idea is spread all around the world. So, in that universal concept that is now the legacy of Champagnat, we can find the seed of your work. But I'd want to discuss education at a global level a little bit differently. I am going to talk about how to make sure that we can prepare our students to improve the world. And I'd like to begin saying that sometimes our students, or maybe former students, surprise us in their work. These are two students from the Pennsylvania University that created one of the vaccines against COVID. Imagine during that crisis, just 3 years ago, where we were all very close to the end of humanity. Imagine what the people that taught them felt to see their students dedicating their lives to science and then contributing to saving humanity during a pandemic. And I remember while I interviewed this educator a few years ago, which is the founder of expeditionary learning here in the United States, I went to interview him because he was writing a paper about his educational movement. And he said, one of the best things about being a teacher in this small city where I live, where I've been a teacher for 30 years, is I can see what my students become when they grow up. And this is a very profound idea, to realize what's the long-term impact of the work we do. Because everyone that dedicates their life to teaching aspires to make the world a better place. However, we don't always have the time to see what's going on with the lives of our former students. And there are some cases where our own students surprise us. Here's Greta Thunberg, who said to her mom, why don't we change the way we're living so we can reduce our impact on nature? And at 14 years old, she was participating in the UN Congress to ask for change. And then at 15 years old, she inspired a global movement. Imagine a 15-year-old girl initiating a global movement for the environment. And we can sometimes understand the relationship between what we're doing and what our students are doing. This is a young girl who participated in a small workshop to teach other people how to write. And she's created a blog for the BBC to tell what was happening in her city at the north of Pakistan. And what happened is that the Taliban have decided that girls didn't have the right to be educated. So this young girl began to write about this. And, of course, this young woman is Malala. It is very interesting to see how it was possible to establish the relationship between this workshop with the huge impact this young woman has had. And this happened when she was just 16 years old. Just after she came out of the hospital after the shot she received. And now she walks to a classroom with thousands of teachers. And she said, well, please, just think of me as an ordinary teacher. Just remember that one voice in a context of injustice can make the difference. In a context of injustice where no one does anything to solve the situation, one voice can make a difference. This is a very powerful message from Malala. And imagine the impact these words may have in other parts of the world. Now, this building is the computing science building. And of course you can imagine why it's named Bill Gates. And Bill Gates asked for one condition. I want this building to be built in front of the place of this where this picture was taken, which is in Stanford University. When Bill Gates was a student, he visited the school and he didn't get the best grades at the time. That bad experience in that class made him decide to get out of college and begin his own work. This now is the way Bill Gates reacts. He comes back, he says hi to the professor that failed him, and goes on with his day. And imagine what this professor must feel, losing the opportunity of teaching the great Bill Gates. And, well, we sometimes should ask ourselves, what are we teaching our students? This is a group of neo-Nazis marching close to the Pennsylvania University. And I'm asking myself, does this reflect this growing movement? The intolerance of people that believe that they're part of a better race? And, well, I'm imagining that people that were the teachers of these people might be reflecting, what did we teach these people that are living with so much hate? And of course, most of you know some of the messes that are happening around the world. Of people that said, no, during the pandemic, we won't pay attention to the authorities. Masks should be optional. Imagine this nonsense. When the authorities are asking you to wear a mask, please help us to control the pandemic, that people came out and said, no, I don't want to. And as a result of this nonsense, well, the name of deaths in the United States is higher than it could have been. Then we have a very famous singer, Kanye West, who sadly lady has dedicated himself to share his anti-Jew feelings, promoting this hateful idea around the world with all his fame. We all know how that hate ended up for Germany, and I don't know, I don't understand why he's bringing that sentiment back. Then we can see the impact of human action on nature, and the last image you can also see in the last transition of the United States government that they wouldn't accept the decision. And they came to the Congress to see if to protest very aggressively. And the people that taught these people, who taught them first, second grade, are now reflecting on themselves, thinking, why did I miss? Why are my former students promoting hate around the world? Well, this is the idea of this text that we're mentioning. This is a paper that invites us to reflect on the impact we have in the youth. I invite you to read this paper. It has 3 parts. The first one talks about the challenges that we face. First, the challenge of what human rights represent. When a group of people denied those rights to another group of people, which is the base of all sorts of violence, including wars. We also talk about poverty and climate change. That's the first part of the paper. And this paper says, of course, this is of interest of teachers. Every educator should ask themselves, what can I do? What capabilities can I develop in my students to bring them closer to the solutions? And to do so, we need to reimagine the culture of learning. And what are the most important actions to do so? The paper is based in the idea that everyone can make a change. Every student, every professor, every parent, every staff can be an agent of change. And this paper is based on human rights, trying to make sure that education makes the student understand how what he's learning in school can apply to the outside world. When students don't understand what's this connection, they live how Bill Gates left and never came back to college. Their bodies might be at school, but their heads are somewhere else, on the streets, whatever. And to rethink about education, we have to rethink the organization of the schools, how we collaborate. What is the meaning of being a teacher? And finally, the building of a learning ecosystem in schools. Now, when I'm teaching a class, I do so based on 2 principles. The first one is the hypothesis that says, if I teach A, my student will learn B. And the second one is, if my students learn B, the consequences will be J and Z. A few years ago, I decided to read the all of the feedback my students gave me. And I realized my program and other programs weren't effective. We're teaching students about global warming, and the students conclude, well, this is very sad, but this is so complicated that we cannot do anything about this. So they develop a denial instead of wanting to participate in solving the problem. And I came with this quote of a professor who said, what if we combine climate change with activities and experiences that allow them to do something? Then when she evaluated what happened between teaching a group of students only teaching them about climate change and another group teaching them and then giving them activities, both learned about climate change, but only the second group developed the hope for the future. We of course know that we need to take action to save the world from climate change. So this was very interesting. Who's interested in learning a little bit more about this topic, you can find this book. It is published in English and Spanish. It's called Education and Climate Change. And I find it very useful in the teaching about climate change. There's no doubt that effective education is very important. I made a study a few years ago of a group of schools in Mexico. Some former students created a school called Via Educación in Monterrey. And what happened a decade ago when they started working, they said, well, school here is not worth it. They just make people memorize stuff, but they don't teach them how to apply their knowledge. And they thought, what if we teach kids how to identify problems in their communities and then to solve them? And that's how we educate them. And just like the professor I mentioned before, they evaluate a new way of teaching. One group will be taught classes, theoretical classes, and the other group will take action. And we saw once again how kids react to practice, to taking action, to reflect on the different problems. And we see that they develop the abilities to solve these problems. What surprised me the most was the huge impact of something so simple and what happened in the minds of the students. This happened in a school in Acapulco and in Monterrey. Both schools are placed in marginal zones. And I remember in the school in Acapulco asking them, the students, asking maybe 14 or 16 years old, these kids chose a project. They decided to bring water to the school. And they started investigating how to get water. And they found a woman who had a water well in her home. They asked the woman for water, and she said, yes, you can have it, but how will you get the water from my well to the school? And
So it took them an hour to take the water to the school. This was a fascinating project. And I told them, why were you interested in this problem in particular when you had so many others? We don't want to be in a school where there is no water, really. Especially in girls when they are on their period. No girl with a period that is menstruating wants to go to a school with no water. So the girls lose school 3, 4, 5 days, and that happens every month. And what happens when you lose a week of classes a month? Well, then you fail class, and the students said that was not fair. That it was not fair that the girls had less of a chance to pass their classes because there was no water. So imagine the morality that was needed for this thought to happen in the minds of these girls. Gender equality, how they can support gender equality simply by bringing water to the school. Now, here you have a text that I recommend to you to read. I think it's translated also in Spanish. It's called Task Teaching and Learning, Improving the Quality of Education for Economically Disadvantaged Students. Now, this work is the synthesis of years of investigation. It says that effective education is that is based on works that make sense for a student, that have a clear purpose, where learning is relevant and has a true meaning, and when the professor basically guides the student and lets them understand, but not by just giving a speech. Why is doing this important? Because most of the professors don't do this. Most of the professors are experts in giving a speech, right? There has been the PISA questionnaire that you might have heard of, and they asked them how professors teach, and these were the results of 2008. And these results show up that most of the professors do things all right when the professor is the center of the class, when they're in a conference, but they are very bad at creating activities so that the students can solve problems, concrete problems, and the result of this is that the students end up being very, very lost. They would ask the students, are you satisfied with your life? And look at the very sad results. In average, 3 of 4 young people are the only ones that are satisfied with their lives. In Mexico, that's the case only for the 80% of the students. And how is it that 20% of the students are not satisfied with their lives? In places like Turkey, well, only 44% of the students are satisfied, of the young people. And they also were asked, have you become a victim of your partners, of your classmates? And 1/3 of the students are victims of their classmates. Now imagine what Marcelin thought. He was worried of how the professors treated the students back then. He really wanted to teach through love. He wanted to tell them that they were loved, that God loved them. And now all these institutions that we have built that are so wonderful are just a factory of violence. 1 of each 3 students are victims of their students. This is a place where they get bullied. And then we wonder, why are our children messed up? Why are they so crazy? Why are they doing all this? Well, because they are being abused, and professors just ignore this. They simply said, oh, that's not really my problem. This is what Pearson told us. And the students were asked, do you think your life has a purpose? Your life has a purpose. And here are the results. Finland. Only 2 of every 3 15-year-olds so that their life had sense. How is it possible that such a privileged nation, these people that are in school, these are not build and go schools, these are people that go to school. How can they be so satisfied with their lives? This school failed. They don't give 15-year-olds to have their purpose. A purpose that is bigger than themselves. This is a very lost boy. Now this is related to what we teach, what we don't teach, and how we do it. We see that yes, most of the professors have a conference, have a speech, and they specify what are the objectives and what they want the students to learn and how this is related to what they learned before. But what they are not doing, most of these professors, is giving the students a problem that doesn't have an obvious solution. What a tragedy this is. Look at the amount of professors that say that they give the students works that have no obvious solution. Of course, then we are surprised that the pandemic happens and the boys are lost because they had never been taught to be autonomous. They had never had a real intellectual challenge. A lot of professors tell the students that they are teaching them to think critically, but they don't work in teams to solve a small problem. Nowadays, Father Carlos Alberto Rojas said that you are an order that values collaboration. Collaboration is very important. What can be done without collaboration, really? And how can we do anything without it? Look at the percentage here. This very small percentage of teachers that say that they make the students work in teams and solve problems. I don't know how they're going to learn collaboration. Maybe osmosis, maybe just through a speech. Look how few professors allow their students to solve their own problems. Again, this is a very small amount of professors. And again, when they were asked, do you give a student that will give, and will you give your students a week to solve a task? And not many professors did this. I don't know how we are going to prepare students for the future if they're not going to have a challenge that will take them a week to solve if they're working together. And then we act all surprised, right? Because our children are all lost, because they have no idea where their life is going, because they could not go to school well. This is what we prepared them for. We got them into a school where they are probably going to be bullied, and where professors are just ignoring them. Well, this is just the beginning of a conversation on how to make education more relevant. And for me, how we do this is by taking development very seriously. There is a 2030 agenda where we relate to the Earth in a sustainable way. This is the opposite of all those challenges that this report about the future of education was talking about, and the one from UNESCO. And I think this can be taught, and not because I'm just simply imagining it, because I have been working for years for education plans, and what I'm going to do is to make this in a very easy manner. And this is the invitation for the report. This is the commission. These are the previous reports about the future education. Now this report is a new one, and it invites us to co-construction with yourselves, with all the network of Marist colleges around the world. And for us, well, what is the plan? What is the roadmap for each institution? How will we do this? This is an invitation for dialogue. This is what this report is, and it focuses on the 5 changes that I mentioned before: the curriculum, learning, and systems. These are three resources, and I understand that you have also contributed to the second of these books, right? But basically what I've been doing with my colleagues and the professors that I have worked with in this task is saying, how can we take this into practice? Well, we'll start with this curriculum. We have this thing called the course of the world. We have to start from the end. We have to develop these projects, these learning through experience that I was talking about earlier. We have to develop a very broad spectrum of capacities. We have to let students see the connection between different branches and make them autonomous, that they can see themselves as part of the solution, that they discover the power they have as individuals, as a community, the power that they have to change the world. So we're going to take the SDGs and human rights as a way to help them discover this, doing what my students, my ex-students would do in Mexico. They will be told, identify a problem in your community and solve it. In the book, I go further into how to do this with high school students especially, but I'm not going to go into this because I don't have enough time. But again, you can read the book that I believe you have also received. And if no, you can find this book online. It's very easy to find. Basically what I did was take into practice this idea that I talked to you about earlier, that every action of education is based on two hypotheses. If they learn something, then the consequences for them and the community and the world are X, Y, Z. So this course for the world takes students, well, they are no longer students, but they take them and they have certain characteristics, and they take into consideration the SDGs. Now, I believe you already know Laura to say, and if you find you can see the inclusion in the world, that we are invited. Now we see 350 units that can be developed in different lessons. It will go from 3 lessons to 20 lessons in certain units, from elementary school to the last year of high school. And this is how we help our students. Then we said we needed a tool for professors to do this together as a collective, because it's of no use that a student develops certain characteristics if they are not going to see them again in the rest of the classes. And how does one create in a school an ordered and systematic process that allow for the creation of global education? Well, with certain steps. First, we have a group that must be in charge. Things happen when we have people that are in charge. Then this group has to start studying the SDGs to truly understand it in depth. We have to focus on those who are no longer students. What do we have to change? And then what are the challenges? Let's create a prototype. Then we have socialization, a plan to specify what and when, what we need to keep our work, how we are going to follow this activity, to see how it's developing, how we keep communication, what do the professors need to do. Then we have to evaluate and do it better the next year. And basically what this does is create a system that is public and allows to evaluate our hypothesis. If we do A, then the consequences are B. If we have a language that makes this process public, this process to evaluate hypotheses, then we can make it easier for schools to learn from one another, and this is a net for getting better. So we have these schools, and they gain 6 years of experience. Just imagine if 600 schools inspired in the work of Marcel Champagnat could work as a net, and every year you want 600 years of experience. Imagine such a powerful transformative change. Now, at the end of this work, this book, we have a synthesis, and it says that to have such a change is mainly an exercise in communication, and to communicate, then it's fundamental to be on in the shoes of the others, to see how they see in a world that might be different to ours. And we see the 5 changes to see this in a cultural, psychological, professional, institutional, and political way. I'm not going to go further into this, but this is basically what we have developed. A capacity of empathy, of seeing the world through others, to truly communicate, to make such a project that involves 600 schools in 75 countries can really work as an integrated network where they have not just a common project, but they learn from one another. This is all I wanted to share today, and then I'll have some time to listen to you.
Professor Reimers, thank you very much for your words. They're very special to us. As you said, we are trying to strengthen the network that we have at a global level, and that's why ever since our launching, we've been working, and now we invite everyone here. We have around 75 educators from around the world, coordinators of schools, of educational regions, to please initiate a dialogue with the professor if you want to ask a question, if you want to thank him for his words.
Muy bien, tenemos aquí al
Very well, we have Brother Alex here. Please say your name. Good morning or good afternoon. Good night. Good morning where I am. It's 11 a.m. Very well. Well, first I'd like to thank you for your presentation. I found it very interesting. I was wondering, you asked us, what have we done with some of our students to make them turn their lives that way? What's the role of the family in all of this? Because it feels like teachers are the only ones to blame. In all of your studies, what have you found is the impact of family? Yes, that's a great question. Of course, education and socialization of students is the result of many factors. What they learn at school, at their home, and the community where they live in. But what I've studied, especially in the last 3 years, analyzing the impact of programs to promote learning experiences during the pandemic, it's true that schools closed the doors and said, well, now families do take charge. We need to teach students where they are, and that means to get to know their context. The best teachers get to know the context of each student. During the pandemic, I studied a lot of programs that continued their work during the first year of the pandemic. And something very interesting was, a program from the Society of Jesus in Chile that work with kids without homes or kids that have been that lived in situations of violence in their homes. And what they tried to do was to regain the confidence of the kids in society. To me, it is difficult to imagine an educator that ignores the reality of their students. I think students and teachers should have better relationships. The most successful teachers during the pandemic were the ones that created an effective dialogue with the families.
Hola, buenos días.
Good morning. Alongside last question, I was wondering, well, we have 600 schools around the world, and they are placed in different contexts. The cultural impact of this global vision for schools in relationship with the individuals, how can we take advantage of it? What strategies can we use to take the most advantage of it? Yes, I wasn't able to talk a little bit more about this last book because one of the topics of the book was to understand and take into account what are the values, what are the rules of the place, of the country, and each family of the kids. I believe when I say that the Educational Commission is doing an effort to promote human rights, there's a perspective that's far away from individuals. I believe this champagnat idea that wants to show kids love, it talks about universality. This is not an idea only for French kids. This is an idea worth sharing with every kid around the world. Unfortunately, there are still many societies where this idea is a little bit taboo. This idea that expressing kids that they're loved, teachers say, well, this is not my job. So I think we need to find a balance between knowing the cultural context of the kids and understanding what are the social norms of this place, but also understanding that education requires to guarantee some universal qualities of humanity. If everyone has a right for education, of course, some societies don't agree with this. People who have the right for education are kids of a certain economical level, or only boys but not girls. We need to understand the context and then find a way to connect that with our universal values. And I think being a member of a global network is very helpful. Imagine if you have schools in Afghanistan. Hopefully there are many schools in Afghanistan. If you have schools over there, you wouldn't stay just looking at the violence against young women over there. You find a way to educate women, even though they don't give them the right to receive education over there. And people over there in Afghanistan should be supported because they're members of something bigger than just their small school in Afghanistan. Everyone around the world should look for ways to teach girls in Afghanistan. Okay, if you see that it is religion that's not allowing girls from being educated, well, trying to find ways to solve the situation, because the schools of Champagnat should be committed to teaching every girl, every boy, no matter what their social level is. Good morning, Professor. I come from Brazil, and I thank you for your advice to improve our practices in the place where I live. In Brazil, we also just lived a political transition. We have a fight between the left and the right, and that has an impact in our schools. We have some trouble to work with students and families. We are promoting the next year campaign about hunger, and well, we kind of look like communists as we're talking about hunger. How can we solve this problem that's affecting our mission in Brazil? That's a very good question. When there's political problems, well, that's one of the worst problems for education. And I think that when the political persona fights against human rights, we have to be very careful. In the United States, people could identify that even though they had different perspectives, it was possible to meet with people with different opinions and debate, because that, at the end of the day, it's what promotes a healthy government. Different political parties then decided that the other couldn't speak. They didn't even have the right to speak. That was very harmful in this country. It hurt terribly our democracy. And I think that in democratic societies, we need to promote listening, not only in students but within parents as well. Promote spaces to listen each other. We need spaces to get together frequently, not to discuss about politics, but to discuss about hunger. Why? Because that's the problem you want to solve. That's the problem affecting us or affecting the inner town. So find spaces so that people can solve problems together. Like the one I mentioned about the water well. Think how you can separate this or isolate these problems from political ideas. More beyond getting involved in political discussions, you can gather people to solve the problems that you're fighting for. In the United States, I've been working with a lot of schools to promote sustainable development, and I find some people who don't want to collaborate because I think they believe this is some sort of political campaign. A school
Basically, they told me to achieve a curriculum of global society that let us have different difficulties with a group of professors that are really hard on this idea. And I told them, well, let's work with these professors. And we made a workshop where we invited all of the professors that were willing to do this. And we managed to do an idea and a lot of lectures for students. And at the end of these workshops, one of the main people that were not in accordance with this workshop came to me and told me, Professor, thank you a lot for this workshop, because I noticed that I have been for 3 years fighting with this curriculum without understanding it. I understand it at this level, but by doing this workshop today of developing class and lectures for the students, it made me understand that on this curriculum we have a space for it to understand chemistry. And all of my fight began because I thought this curriculum was gonna let us and tear us apart from science, and now I understand it's gonna join us with it. So sometimes we put our perspective and we have a closed mind and we do not understand what people think, and it's something that people don't understand. And 2,000 kilometers of altitude, and we understand that we need to put the ideas into other people's mind and build a plan for students. Students realize that it's easier to get along together in political ideology.
Good morning, Professor. My name
Por cierto, sobre esta buena
By the way, by the question that you made to me, if you can find me on Twitter, yesterday I participated in a conversation about this topic, what to do in USA in a context where there's high polarization politically and troubled visions. And let me see if I can find it on my phone. You can find me in Twitter by Fernando Reimers, and what I did was made a retweet about this organization that was the one that analyzed this dialogue. And it's a dialogue and a conversation that it's quite important. So you're going to find it on Twitter.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Mark from Johannesburg, South Africa. We have a very complex society and 11 official languages. So we try and keep things simple, and our vision for our pupils is...
I'm having a hard time understanding because someone is translating for me. Please don't translate. Let me hear it in English directly.
So my name is Mark from Johannesburg in South Africa, and we have 11 official languages and a very complex society. We try and simplify things for our students, and our vision for our students is to prepare them for any future. When we read lists and lists and lists of competencies, we can read 20, 30 of them, but in your experience, what would you say the top 2 or 3 competencies are to prepare students for any future? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't think that there are 2 or 3
Gracias por la pregunta. No creo que haya una o dos competencias, pero lo que creo es que es increíblemente valioso ver eso para una escuela. Es poder entrar en diálogo en una conversación donde los profesores conversen sobre cuál.
Our graduates to master. And sadly, many schools don't do that. They have a very general idea of what they hope will characterize the student, but they can translate that activity into specific competency. So my answer to your question, I'm afraid, is that it takes 180 competencies, and they're presented in the book, which I believe you have received, and both of them are available in English and in many other languages. And it's just 3 pages in those books that name what in my experience are the competencies required. So I wish I could give an answer to your question, which is that there are 2 or 3 competencies. I don't believe there is such a thing, because I do think humans are complicated creatures, and they live in a complicated ecosystem, and if we're going to prepare ourselves to be a force for good and not the opposite, we need to be intentional in trying to do more than 1 or 2 things.
Buenos días, doctor.
Good morning, doctor. I'm the brother Fernando from Colombia, and I would like to thank for all of your knowledge on this conference and all of the youth you have shared. And I think we agree with the idea of that the teacher is the center of knowledge, and to put the student at the center of knowledge is also important. Recognizing all of the abilities that the student can have and all of the preparation the teacher can have. So that's the way the teacher becomes a guide and a motivator for the student. I would like to ask you about the paradigm that has given us modernity nowadays, and how is it associated by achieving happiness in the development that searches an economical outgrowth. So that's the way that happiness has to be with the hand of economical growth. So when you propose to us a global education to improve the world, I was asking myself if our societies, our college societies, what do they search? What's the last objective? Is the idea of development, is it really the main objective for the kids and for the youth? Even if they're in Finland, Colombia, Belgica, are they happy? Do they found willing and motive for their life? So what's the paradigm and what concept can it be blended and misunderstood with this? And how can they be mixed together to search happiness and balance? Yeah, I think that's an important question in order for teachers to have it in a college. And this is what I was talking about, what I told about the 13 steps. And I said that the first thing that we had to talk about was what are the objectives of education, and then what are the abilities that you need to have to achieve those goals. So this is my opinion personally. I don't think it's quite important. I don't think there's no misunderstanding with this. And this is to prepare people to become architects of their own life and being active actors in communities of where they are. And I understand that all of us form part of a communities that start with our family, our neighborhood, our community, with the state where we live in, with the city where we are, with the world in where we live in. And that the development of autonomy, the capacity of taking care of your own life, and the efficiency of participating actively in all of those communities are things that are not in contradiction one with the other. So, by one side, I can tell you that I think that Bill Gates is a man that has been quite successful, because on one way he contributed on developing the technology industry, and because he has the capacity to provide for his family and for his health. And then he realized that he made so many material goods that the thing that had more sense is to put those goods to develop and improve society. So he created a foundation that managed on treating diseases like malaria and all of those things. But I think that it's equally effective for a person to develop the capacity of saying, how can I take charge of my life, to make a business? Do I have the capacities to be a gardener? So I'm going to start a little business with this, and I'm going to be a little entrepreneur. And being an entrepreneur, I can provide for myself and for my family. But once I manage to make this autonomy and to be autosufficient, I can also create opportunity for other people. Maybe I can create my own business and help others. For example, I have a great friend, a barber that I have known since 40 years. And he was a Greek immigrant that arrived here to Mexico, and he was a policeman in Greek, and he was quite an honest man. And he put in jail dangerous people that was connected to the mob in that time. And they threatened him with his life. So he came into this country without a penny in his pocket, and he asked, what can I do? And he said, well, he didn't understand the language at first. So the first thing that I can do here is to cut hair.
and he learned how to cut hair, and then he worked, I think, in a barber shop, and he was quite an organized man, and with the time he bought a place to have a barber shop, and he then put in his employment other people, and now he has quite an important business. But the idea of this that I have noticed that this man has made a lot of barbers. For me, it's such a wonderful example. It's almost the same as Bill Gates, because he's a person that developed the capacity to provide and to educate two kids. You know, he has two kids. One is a musician, another one studying here in Harvard. So what do I mean by education? Education is developing the capacity in a person to create a business and to be autosufficient. That's quite an important thing too. And if we can let other also have this ability by improving himself and being an active member of society, I think it's great. And I don't think two things are in contradiction one with another. And that's my own version. I don't think this has any relevance, but what I do think is relevant is that school communities have this dialogue and they get along each other and talk about it. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Thank you so much, Professor. My name is Natalino, and I work at schools in Brazil. We're a lot of schools, many different contexts. I'm sure you're familiar with the context of some of our countries. The idea that I get lately is that there's a lot of areas of opportunity, especially when we talk about inequality. When people talk about inequality, I think people in countries that have been historically different or segregated, they have a lot of difficulties. So why am I sharing this? Because when we talk about countries that are focusing on education, they have a little bit of advantage. But countries like ours, we're in a little bit of a disadvantage because of the history and the political ideas. Because a sector of the population has more economical power. So my question is, how can we, as an international institution, can change these situations in a collaborative way in different societies?
Para terminar, yo creo
And just one last question. The topic of students and teachers. I've always thought humans are very fast to act and to shift from one side to another. And as a teacher, I've seen that extremes are always very dangerous. And well, the center is kind of difficult to reach always. But that, I think, should be the exact point where we should stay. And that was just my comment. Thank you. Yes, those are great comments. Thank you. Definitely, in societies with a lot of inequality, schools by themselves cannot eliminate that situation, but schools have a lot of power. They have enough social power to be able to fight against those structures. Schools have some autonomy. When you see the PISA survey, you could see that poverty is a great indicator of how far a kid will study. If you were born in a school, in a family where both your parents don't know how to read, then you have a lot of probabilities of not studying college. But schools can take students out of their context of poverty and allowing them to experience social mobility. So, my feeling is that the work of educators is to do the best they can, to work as hard as they can, to make sure that students can change their context. Some teachers think this problem is so big that I cannot do anything about it. And they end up excusing their failures in their students' poverty. What you need to do, what you need to do is take a look at yourself and think, what can you do better? There are different forces operating within the family, within society. I've been analyzing all of this for many years, and I understand that there are very difficult contexts. But it is true that in Brazil, like in other places of the world, there are successful cases. There are poor kids that excel in their academic life. Sometimes for these kids, school is the only opportunity they have for social mobility. So a kid that goes to school has a lot of opportunities. But all of these opportunities are limited to what the school has to offer. We need to focus on students, but we need to learn how to guide them. Maybe 30 years ago, there was an educational movement that said, no, we need to have kids building their own knowledge. So the teacher sat down and looked at the kids. Of course, that's not education. The job of the educator is to structure the classes, or the creation of our courses took us a lot of time. And well, teachers, that's what they need to do. They need to build their classes. They need to build opportunities for their students. I teach my students, of course, we're in a very particular context in Harvard, but I teach them how to solve problems. And once they start working on them, they say, well, the professor doesn't know a thing. How am I going to do this? Well, we need to develop strategies to help them solve those problems. Some students surprise themselves because at the end of the class, they came back and to thank me. Thank you for giving me the confidence to solve things I thought I wouldn't be able to solve. There are a lot of solutions that the student cannot see by themselves, but we can help them see them. Good morning, doctor. First, thank you for your talk today. You mentioned this example in Mexico, and I thought, well, that's a Maris school because it is educating great citizens. I could identify two important aspects of what you said. First, in every academic activity, you need to have the student and the teacher. But now, I supervise the activities in the schools in my wonderful Peru. But I have a question. This question might be a little bit superficial, but in a lot of schools around the world, we have, well, what's the importance, if it has some, what is the importance of the physical appearance of the student? The haircut, a tattoo, the way they dress, is there any impact? What can you say about that? Okay. The school I mentioned, it wasn't a Mary school. I was sure that if Marceline had seen the school, he'd agreed they had a very good method of education. And yes, I'm sure that most of the schools you have do a lot of the activities that I mentioned, because well, I had a good friend that was a member of the Society of Jesus, and he made a study about former students from the schools in this area, and he wanted to know what those people were doing. And he tried to see if they lived by the values of the institution. And his research shocked everyone at college, because what he saw was that none of them were following the values of the Jesuits. And so I do think we need to take the time to look for our former students, to see what they're doing. And so yes, this is a challenge and an invitation for you. If we did a study for the 600 schools, you might be surprised with what you might find. And yes, I think the presence of the student might have some importance, yes. There is a difference between conceptual knowledge and procedure knowledge. If one has conceptual and then the experimental knowledge flows very freely. This means the student will be able to solve problems. Sometimes this can be difficult. I was once driving and saw a banner that said, "Driving classes, only theoretical classes." Well, I don't know about you, but in some places you need to have a practical exam to have your driver's license. And what this example shows is that some educational institutions don't understand the role.
And I think that educators like John Dewey and other ones that can relate on their work, what they teach to us was that there's a series of things that can only be learned by doing them. And that's the way that I choose to interpret these examples that I had and that I gave to you. And I always teach my students with manual things, and what I told them, what it was to me to be able to work with my hands and to be able to work on carpentry or to do little electric reparations and to be able to fix plumbing and the water in my house. And I think there's a knowledge that goes hand to hand with experimental things, because I think you think with your hands when you're solving a problem. And I think that person that has experience understands things differently. On your third question, that it's one of the questions that I hadn't thought about before, but I will think out loudly with you, is that I do think that students learn better where they feel accepted. And if a student is told that you do not belong in this school, it's going to be more hard for him to understand these concepts. And for students, sometimes the way of dressing shows its identity. So if they use a piercing, or if they have tattoos, or if they decide to put different clothes, I don't think it's important. And one of the things that does not communicate to a student that they are accepted, it's that. Now, sometimes the way the people dress does not show its identity, but it shows its possibilities. For example, if they have economical media or if they have economical power. And sometimes I want to give an example, they give clothes to us and they give it for free, so it's not clothes that I had chosen personally, but it was clothes that I had on hand and that I had to put on. And when I started to teach is when I was able to buy clothes for myself. Well, since I was a college student, I bought my own clothes. So I do think that it's important for a school. Like, for example, I have made studies on rural education in Honduras, where I have found that educators give themselves an impression of the knowledge a kid has based on its clothes. And at the end, the result was that the kids that do not have shoes, that there are a lot of them, and the kids that have broken shirts and pants, they have an idea that they will not get far away because of this. And thanks to the fact that the educator has this idea of the students, they do not give the same time to teach them. So it's just, I think that the question that you are making is quite deep, and there are a lot of things to notice, because on one side I could tell you that it's quite important that for those who make a community in school ask themselves, what's the role for us, the clothing of the kids and their physical appearance, and what do they communicate to us. And I think that's a conversation that can go both ways. The first reflection that we have to make to ourselves is, what are we gonna note from the way a kid is dressed, and how that is gonna change the way in how we treat him. And I think that's an activity that is based on the experience of the educators to examine their own prejudices and see how society has influenced our perspective, which is quite a classist society. And there's a quite great amount of people that make ideas of other people based on the color of their skin or the way they're dressed. So I think the idea that we make of that people makes the founding of our prejudices. So I think that it's also part of an education to show students to have the conscience of what I just told you, to have the power of understanding that the way of dressing is not an expression of identity, but it would also have an effect on the image that on the way others are formed and the doors that can be opened or closed thanks to this fact. Because societies have a lot of prejudices based on physical appearance and clothing.
Professor Reimers,
Professor Reimers, I would really like to thank you to share your knowledge with us. Please, a round of claps.
sin lugar a dudas,
Without any doubt, we would like to greatly thank you. We will still be in contact with you, and I would like to make an agreement to the Father Jose Padre Alberto Mesas, and of course, because we had here the Padre Daniel also, and I really would like to make sure that we have quite a friendship, and we will invite you in other occasions. So once again, I hope you have a great day in Boston, and I hope you have a great luck in your research. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and thank you. Thanks, teacher. And on this way, I would like to conclude our global streaming but first I would like to invite you tomorrow at the same time at 9:15 in Mexico's time, 9:15 in Brazil's time, 4:15 in Roma, 16:15 in Manila, and our conference in Marist School's House of Lights, Voices of Marist Women. So I would like to thank the participations to our YouTube channels and on Facebook. Great day for you all. Thank you a lot.